This is Rick Levine with your March astrological forecast. March is a very interesting month. It's a bit crazy for a number of reasons, and we'll get into that in just a few moments. As always, I do have announcements of my upcoming events. You are free to scroll through these and jump to the link, which will be down below, that says where the actual forecast begins. But for those of you who are interested in possibly attending some of these events, I'll go through them as quickly as possible. Before we get into the events, though, I would like to remind you that you can sign up for my email list by going to ricklevineastrologer.com. All clickable links will be down below in the first pinned comment. And ricklevineastrologer.com will get you on my mailing list. I will not overload you with marketing material, but that way you'll be kept abreast of some of the important things going on and some of the events that I'll be doing. As many of you already know, every month I pick someone from the list. Actually, my assistant Gail uses a random number generator, and crazy enough, this month was the number picked was 1111. And this is the number that was assigned to Rich Brown. Rich will receive an email from us and we will set up an individual reading. These are mini harmonic readings, and every month someone on the list receives one of these readings for free. So if you're not on the list and you'd like to be considered for a reading in the next months ahead, make sure that you go there and sign up. Also, if you're interested in learning more about my other online teachings, I have a Patreon page, and that is patreon.com/Rick Levine. And of course, that link is down below also. And also, it's important to subscribe to this YouTube page. It certainly helps me. And share this forecast with your friends and help to get the word out. The first important event is Astrology Night at Soul Food Coffee House. Normally, this is held on the first Friday night of the month. However, the first Friday night of March, I will be speaking at Convergence 2025. For those of you in the Florida or Orlando area, that's cosmicpatternsconference.com. That'll be March 7th through 9th. And because I will be there on the first Friday night of the month, Astrology Night is actually going to be a week early this month, which means that Astrology Night will be on Friday evening, February 28th. And of course, that's at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time at Soul Food Coffee House in Redmond, Washington. For those of you who live in the Seattle area, come on down. It's always a fun evening. I'll be talking about the oddities of Mercury, Venus, and Mars in particular, all either turning retrograde or direct, either recently or coming up rather quickly. And if you can't make it, of course, the event is live streamed. The link is in the comments below. It's on my YouTube channel, and feel free to join us for the event live if you can. And if not, you can watch it afterwards. It will still be on the YouTube channel afterwards. By the way, next month, the first Friday night of April, the April Astrology Night, will be back to the first Friday night of the month. And my birthday is on April 6th. The first Friday night of April is April 4th. So come and join me next month for my birthday celebration. More on that later on. I also want to announce that on May 2nd through 5th, that I'm inviting you to join me in a conference called Shifts Happen, because therapy doesn't do retrogrades. And this will be in London. I'll be doing this with Steve Judd, Nick Campion, Alex Trenoweth, and Penny Thornton. There will be limited spaces available at this boutique, smaller conference. And if you're interested, just send an email to me directly at rlevine@stariq.com. We'll have complete details and registration information in the days ahead. On May 9th through May 12th, I will be at the Fourth International Portuguese Astrology Conference in Porto, Portugal. And the link for that is down below also. Then the following weekend on May 17th, 18th, I will be at the Happy Souls Festival, and this will be the Stockholm International Astrology Conference. That will be May 17th and 18th, and the link for that is down below also. This will be the first international conference being held in Stockholm, and for those people who are in that area, in any of the Nordic countries for that matter, it's going to be an exciting event with a number of other speakers. I will be a featured speaker at that particular conference. And then the following weekend on May 23rd through the 25th, I'll be still in Stockholm, and I'll be doing a weekend of deep astrology. And this will be about taking chart readings to the next level. And again, for that event, just send me an email at rlevine@stariq.com, and I'll send you the complete details on that weekend event, which will be a weekend of chart interpretation work. On the weekend of June 6th and 7th, I will be at the Copenhagen Astrology Conference. I will be doing the keynote address for the Copenhagen Astrology Congress. I'm looking forward to that because, as many of you know, a lot of my work is about quantum astrology. And of course, Copenhagen has a particular place of interest in the history of quantum physics, that being the home of Niels Bohr. I'll have more to say on that later. Then after that conference, I'll be doing a 2 days hands-on natal chart interpretation workshop. That'll be on June 10th and 11th, also in Copenhagen. Again, just send me an email if you want more information on that 2-day workshop on chart interpretation in Copenhagen on June 10th and 11th. Then we're jumping all the way to September 5th, 6th, and 7th. Kepler College is holding a symposium in Niagara Falls, New York. Information on that will be available at keplercollege.org. And I will be doing a keynote address for that conference and also be teaching a master class at that conference also. And then we're going to end this little segment with the fact that I will be back in Goa on November 20th through December 2nd. As many of you know, I've been doing a yearly workshop, initiation into astrology, at this Ayurvedic healing spa in the south end of Goa. This will be the last time I'll be doing the initiation. Starting next year, I'll be doing more intermediate, more advanced work at the same venue. It's a magical venue. It's an Ayurvedic healing spa. It's close to the beach, just a couple-minute walk down to a magical swimmable beach. The event is an amazing event every year. I am looking forward to being back there, and I invite you to go to heavenandearthworkshops.com and initiation into astrology, and consider joining us. That event actually takes a little bit of planning in advance. So if you're considering that, you might want to check that information out now. Again, that's November 20th through December 2nd in Goa, India. That's it. That's the events that I have coming up. More information on some of those in the weeks and months ahead. So, with no further ado, let's get to the month of March. As I said at the very beginning, March is an interesting month, but it's interesting because of a curious reason. You know, we're coming off of a number of retrogrades. The outer planets are not moving very fast right now. Pluto never moves really fast, but even Uranus just coming off of its retrograde. Saturn is gaining a little speed, but Jupiter also coming off its retrograde. Mars just coming off its retrograde, Venus turning retrograde on March 1st. We'll get to the Venus story in a little bit. And Mercury turning retrograde this month. The Venus and Mercury retrograde combined with Mars having just turned direct make this interesting because planets aren't moving very fast. Now, what that means is that there's not a lot of aspects that are being made compared to other months. And in fact, we look at Mercury, for example, we begin the month on March 1st with Mercury at about 27.5 degrees of Pisces. And as crazy as this sounds, we end the month with Mercury at 29 degrees of Pisces, only a degree and a half away. Now, it does get up to 9 degrees of Aries, so it moves a bit. It moves about 10 or 11 degrees during the month, but it's like it goes forward a bit and then comes back, and we end up at the end of the month at the same place where we started, at least with respect to Mercury. With Venus, Venus at the beginning of the month has pushed all the way up to 10 degrees of Aries, but because it is stationary retrograde on March 1st, by the end of the month, Venus is backed all the way up to 28 degrees of Pisces, kind of where Mercury and Neptune are now at the beginning of March. So again, there's this kind of feeling like we're not going anywhere fast. There's like, it's like the wheels are spinning, but it's like the mice running around or the hamster running around on the wheel, not making any forward progress. Even Mars, which has now turned direct, it turned direct a week ago. Mars now moving direct is going to take a little bit for it to gain speed. And so Mars at the beginning of the month, Mars is at 17 degrees of Cancer. And by the end of the month, it's only at 23 degrees of Cancer, meaning that even Mars only gains 6 degrees of forward motion for the entire month. When Mars is really moving fast, it goes through half a sign in a month. So Mars also is moving rather slowly. Jupiter also only moves 4 degrees all month. Saturn also only moves 4 degrees all month. Uranus, as I mentioned earlier, has just turned direct, and Uranus, in fact, turned direct the end of January. And so Uranus actually on January 30th. And so Uranus on the first of the month is at about 23.5 degrees, a little bit over that, of Taurus. And at the end of the month, it's only at 24.5 degrees or so. So Uranus only moves about 1 degree for the entire month of March. Neptune, which is almost at 29 degrees of Pisces. It's actually at 28 degrees 55 minutes at the beginning of March, is at 0 degrees of Aries on the last day of the month. This is actually a big deal with Neptune moving into Aries, but it does it on literally at the end of the month, on March 30th, actually. And so Neptune really only moves 1 degree all month. And Pluto, which is at almost 3 degrees at the beginning of the month of Aquarius, 2 degrees and 55 minutes, is only at 3.5 degrees by the end of the month. It only moves a half a degree all month. So what does this mean? What this means is that the month of March has very little forward movement. Now, the paradox here is that although there's very little forward movement, which also means there's a dearth of, there's a lack of aspects being made from planet to planet, except for some conjunctions. There's a lot of conjunctions this month as we begin the month with the pileup in Pisces and Aries. Let's actually begin and switch over and look at the chart now of March 1st. And of course, as always, the charts that we will be looking at all have 0 degrees Aries rising, meaning that wherever you are on the planet, there are no houses in effect in these charts. And the reason is that houses are always locally determined. And although I am Pacific Standard Time here outside of Seattle, Washington, people watching this are literally all around the globe. And so your ascendant and midheaven at any chart time that we're looking at will be different than mine. Having said that, once you adjust your time zone, my chart for 12 p.m. on March 1st, that shows the moon at 6 degrees and 15 minutes of Aries, the moon will be at 6 degrees and 15 minutes of Aries for you wherever you are on the planet once you adjust this to your time zone. So here we are on March 1st, and we can see that the planets are all clustered on one side of the chart, from Pluto through all the way around to Mars. And yet the main density of planets are in Pisces and Aries. And because of that, the faster moving planets, the Sun and Mercury and Venus, are all going to be dancing backwards and forwards. Actually, the Sun will only be moving forward, but Mercury and Venus, because they're either turning retrograde today on March 1st, or turning retrograde later in the month. Mercury turns retrograde on the 14th, that those planets are going to move Pisces into Aries and then back into Pisces and then back into Aries. And so we're having a lot of conjunctions back and forth here over the month. And the peculiarity of the month is that there's not a lot of forward movement. However, we have 2 eclipses this month. And of course, eclipses are always connected to change. We have Neptune, which changes signs only once every 14 years, is changing signs by the end of March. And the planets that are moving back and forth, conjoining Neptune, either forward, direct, or retrograde, or then direct again, are all dancing around this Neptune as it is moving from 28 degrees Pisces 55 minutes to 0 degrees of Aries throughout the month. And this is going to be a very powerful, powerful change. But again, there's not a lot of overall movement in the planets moving forward. And I'm going to keep coming back to that theme because it makes the month kind of curious in what it is that is going on. Now, throughout the month, we do have Venus, which turns retrograde today. And whenever I say the word today, I'm always referring to the chart on the date of the chart we're looking at. And of course, we are looking at the chart of March 1st. But Venus turning retrograde today. And then by the 3rd, Mercury, which is at 27 degrees and 38 minutes of Pisces, by March 3rd, Mercury will move into Aries. By the 14th, Mercury will turn retrograde. By the 27th, Venus, which has already been retrograde for the entire month, will back into Pisces by March 27th, followed by Mercury backing into Pisces on March 29th, and then Neptune moving into Aries on March 30th. And so you can see this dance around the end of Pisces, beginning of Aries. And this is a very particularly significant point in the zodiac. In fact, there are schools of astrology that use 0 degrees of Aries as an actual point, just like there's a planet there called the world point or the 0 Aries point. And with Neptune moving over that point by itself, as it only does every 165 years, this is significant. But because of the retrograde dance around this, in other words, because Neptune will turn retrograde, Neptune moves into Aries on March 30th, but then Neptune will turn retrograde in July, and it will back up into Pisces in October to move back into Aries next year. And when Neptune actually turns direct in December and then moves into Aries again next year, it will be joined by Saturn. Now, Saturn also peaks its way into Aries later this year. And so a lot of the theme that we're dealing with right now is this dance around Pisces and Aries that's really kind of at its crazy height through the month of March and April of this year. And it's giving us flavors and tastes of the end of something. The end of what? The end of an entire cycle of the zodiac, whether it's Neptune's 165-year cycle, or whether it's Saturn's 30-year cycle, 29.5-year cycle, or whether it's the sun's annual cycle. The sun actually moves from Pisces into Aries, as it does every year on the first day of spring, and that occurs on March 20th. And so, again, there's this heightened energy around the movement of the end of the cycles, multiple cycles in Pisces into Aries, and things beginning to happen, things beginning to move forward. We're going to talk more about the eclipses and how important they are, but eclipses occur in pairs, and we have two eclipses in March. We have an eclipse on March 13th. That's the Virgo full moon. And that eclipse has its own story that it will play out with the planet Uranus that we'll talk about in just a moment, which again is change. There's change denoted here, not just by eclipses, but by the fact that Uranus is so tied into this eclipse. Also, then we have the second eclipse on March 29th, and that is the Aries new moon eclipse. And again, we'll have Uranus playing into that, but from a different perspective. It's a little bit more complicated, I think, than that's the solar eclipse. It's a little bit more complicated than the flow of energy around the lunar eclipse. So let's jump into the day by day. And again, here we are looking at the chart for March 1st. We can see the cluster of planets around Pisces and Aries. We can see that the moon is in Aries, and in fact, the moon moved into Aries at 1:51 a.m. Pacific time on Saturday, March 1st. But the other thing that is most significant here is that Venus today is stationary retrograde. Now, when planets are, you've heard me say this many times before, but when planets are go from direct to retrograde or retrograde to direct, they slow down in order to change directions, and Venus at 10 degrees of Aries really has been at 10 degrees of Aries since February 23rd. It reached 10 degrees of Aries, and it then turns retrograde on March 1st, but it's still in 10 degrees of Aries all the way until March 7th. So it is retrograde, but it's moving so slowly, it's barely moving at all. And what this really means is that when a planet moves slowly, it gains power. And so Venus is really holding energy right now. And so I think that this combination of Venus going stationary or stationary retrograde, combined with the fact that these planets are all the other planets, Mercury and Neptune in particular, are so close to the end of Pisces. Even the nodal axis, the north node, is at 27 degrees of Pisces. But remember, the nodes move retrograde. But over the last few days, through the month of February, Neptune has come across that point of the North Node, and Neptune is still only a degree away from the North Node. And so there's this whole sense of time warping going on, of things having to do with vortexes of what year is it? What time is it? How are we moving forward? Are we moving backward? And into that, we have on March 1st, Mercury moving direct, lining up with the North Node. Mercury actually joins the North Node in the morning on March 1st. But we also have the fact that this little cluster of the nodal axis, the North Node, and Neptune are all creating this energy around the uncertainty of what the heck, or maybe what the hell is going on. We also have an energy building here on the 1st, and we can see that with the sun at 11.5 degrees of Pisces, 11 degrees 29 minutes is what it shows at noon, coming into a square with Jupiter. That if we move this ahead one day, we can see that the sun and Jupiter now at 12 degrees of Pisces. This is a square between the two biggest things in the sky. And the fact that we have here a square between the light of the center of the solar system and the largest gaseous expansion of Jupiter, this is a day of overdoing. This is a day of too much. This is a day where we can take things a little bit too far, and yet there's a sense of blind optimism, of confidence that can build while the sun is squaring Jupiter. We still have the moon moving through Aries. Midday, the moon makes a conjunction with Chiron. In fact, the moon squares Mars and then makes a conjunction with Chiron. And this is bringing up another energy that we're going to be feeling this month, because we'll get to this a little bit later in the month, when Mars, creeping along rather slowly, will be moving to perfect its square with Chiron on March 26th. And remember, because Mars went retrograde and direct, Mars will be repeating this energy of its square to Chiron that began last October and will play through by the end of this month. And so there's this background feeling all month that on March 2nd may be heightened as the moon squares Mars and conjoins Chiron, because even on March 2nd, the Mars square Chiron is really only 3.5 degrees from being perfected, from being exact. And so as the moon swings through there, we're reminded of reasons why we can't accomplish what we want to accomplish. Often with Chiron squaring the Mars, it's almost like there's a fear of pushing too hard, too fast, maybe even a fear of Mars, of our own anger. And Mars in Cancer often has to do with a holding in, a passive aggressive sense of holding in that energy. So we may have some energies here that may indicate throughout the month a need to reassess, reconsider what it is that we really want and how we're going to push to get it, because we may not be getting what it is that we want while Mars is pushing towards that third and final square to Chiron toward the end of the month. That's March 2nd. Now, as we get to March 3rd, and we can see actually even on March 2nd, we can see that Mercury is at 29 degrees of Pisces. Mercury's moving, rather quickly. It will move by the 3rd. We can see here by noon that Mercury now is at 0 degrees of Aries. This is significant for a number of reasons, because as Venus goes retrograde, Venus is going to retrograde back over that. Well, first of all, it'll retrograde back over its conjunction with Mercury, as Mercury is moving direct and Venus is moving retrograde. It will also then move back over that point Venus will move back over that 0 degrees Aries point while Neptune is moving forward toward it again. We're having this dance around that 0 degrees Aries point, which feels like we're on the cusp of something new, something different, something we've never seen before, but we're not there yet. And we don't know if we're ever going to get there because there's this dance of this backward forward energy. That's March 3rd. Also on March 3rd, the moon moves into Taurus at 4:29 a.m. Here by noon, you can already see that the moon is moving at about 5 3/4 of a degree of Taurus. As the moon entered Taurus early this morning, it picked up on a square with Pluto, and so there may be some intensity of feelings that are being expressed, and especially as Mercury moves into Aries, we may say things before we think about what the results of our speaking. How do we say that? It's the talk first and think later, which doesn't always work out for our benefit. That is March 3rd. On March 4th, there is no particular significant aspects other than we can see that the sun is moving closer and closer day by day toward its trine with Mars. It'll get there exactly on March 7th. And that's significant because even by the 13th at the full moon, there's still going to be some energy with that Mars being a bit of a release point. And we'll talk about that in just a few more minutes. But on March 4th itself, there's no exact or particular aspects. Mercury, however, is actually coming into and making a sextile with Pluto. The exact sextile that Mercury makes with Pluto is on March 5th. It's actually at 5:12 in the morning, but we will be feeling that on the 4th and the 5th. And Mercury, as it makes that sextile with Pluto, will also be, it suggests that we are ready to speak a truth. And Mercury is at an interesting position because the moon on the 5th moves into Gemini, and it moves into Gemini at 4:29 a.m. And by noon, you can see that the moon is making a trine with Pluto and a sextile with Mercury, which can be in some ways a perfect storm of feeling something very powerfully, very deeply, and giving it language, giving it words, because the moon in Gemini, Gemini is Mercury's sign. The moon is actually moving toward a conjunction that it will reach tomorrow with Jupiter, also in Gemini. But these both give strength to Mercury moving through Aries, where it's going to say things first and then think about them later. And so we have this kind of like a little bit of a perfect storm between what some people call a minor grand trine or a sextile bowl, where we have Pluto, Mercury, and the moon making trines and making a trine and sextiles with one another, kind of easing and smoothing that communication. That's on the 5th. When we get to the 6th, we can see that the moon is now still in Gemini, but having this morning reached its conjunction with Jupiter, and the moon also moving through its first quarter square with the sun. There may be some uncomfortable energy about what we're feeling. That would be the Pisces energy, the sun and all those planets in Pisces, the sun, Saturn, and Neptune in Pisces, but the moon and Jupiter in Gemini. And it's like we're thinking one thing, but we perhaps, wanting out of compassion, we may not be saying everything that we are thinking. That's on the 6th. On the morning of the 7th, the moon moves into Cancer. That actually occurs at 8:28 a.m. Pacific time. And the other thing here is that we can also now see on the 7th that the sun is exactly trining Mars. That occurs at 9:12 p.m. this evening. When that perfects, there's this flow of energy, this intense kind of expression of feelings that we may not be expressing fully outwardly, but we're feeling the need to create boundary. There's a defensive energy here with Mars in Cancer as the sun is trining it, but the sun is also pushing toward a conjunction with Saturn. And this is also a very significant thing. It occurs once a year, and the sun's conjunction with Saturn is exact on the 12th. We'll get there for a moment, but we'll get there in a moment. But the thing here is that Mars is actually a player here, because that Mars energy is building in a flowing way. Although while Mars is in Cancer, it's not necessarily trying to assert itself to move into new territory. Instead, it's asserting itself to protect what it thinks it needs to protect, what it has. So it's kind of a peculiar set of energies here that we're feeling, that's building, and yet there is a flow here of vitality that I think we're beginning to take more seriously, the work that needs to be done to defend what we think is, or what we believe is important. That is the 7th. As we move to the 8th, the sun, which was trining Mars on the 7th, by the 8th, the sun is making a half square to Pluto, and this can intensify the energies quite a bit. We also notice that midday, the Cancer moon now is trining the sun and trining Saturn, and also conjoining Mars. And so again, we're getting this intense need to stand up for what we believe to be important, to defend our energy. And yet with the sun making a half square to Pluto, we're running into some sort of conflict with a very deep and powerful energy that we have to stand up to, and it may not be an easy thing to do. By the 9th, the moon moves out of Cancer into Leo. At noon, we can see that it's at almost 28 degrees of Cancer, but it moves into Leo at 3:58 p.m. And as it does that, of course, it then begins to pick up on its opposition to Pluto, which is another background energy that's going to build all the way through the end of April, when Mars, moving direct, moves back into Leo, and then it will make its third and final opposition to Pluto. We'll talk about that quite a bit next month, because that's going to be an important part of the energy of the conflict, of the tension that's going to perhaps come to another round of culmination as we move toward the end of April. But here on March 9th, the significant thing is that the moon, as it's moving through the end of Cancer, is making trines with Neptune. The energy still is confused a bit with Neptune, with Mars still close to trining or being trined by the sun and by Saturn. There's still a flow of energy here. There's a watery energy that is quite important. And I think that in some ways gives us the potential for becoming depressed, because we don't seem to be able to act in a way that gets us to where we want to get to. This being one of the themes of March. There's a lot of movement, but we're not getting anywhere fast. By the 10th, we can see that the moon is now at 10 degrees, almost 11 degrees of Leo by midday. It's making trines now with Venus going retrograde and Mercury going direct. They are coming closer and closer to their conjunction. That's actually exact tomorrow on the 11th. But we also have Venus coming into a half square. Let's move this ahead to the 11th, and we can now see that the Mercury and Venus conjunction is exact here at 3:54 p.m. And it's an interesting conjunction because Mercury is moving direct, but it's slowing down, getting ready to turn retrograde in a week, a little bit less than a week, actually. Mercury turns retrograde on the 14th, so in just a few days, actually. Meanwhile, Venus being retrograde, there's energy that's being tied up, but it's in Aries, and Aries is the planet, is the sign that's associated with Mars. We have Mars moving direct, but not very fast in Cancer, which again is a bit receptive and retentive. So once again, we're getting the same theme of energy of whether we're expressing it outward or pulling it inward. It's not clear as to which way we're getting to go. We also see that the square between Mars and Chiron is getting closer. Here on March 11th, the square between Mars and Chiron is now less than 3 degrees. It's about 2¾ degrees. I think here the important thing is to understand that what we're thinking, what we're saying, that's Mercury in Aries, still a bit impulsively, Aries, in some ways is almost like we feel like we've been here before, because this is now Venus retrograding back over points where it was in late February. So this is the 11th. And by the 12th, Mercury still moving forward is making it's moving into a semi-square, that's a half square with Uranus. Venus making that exact same half square today on March 11th, and Mercury making that half square tomorrow on the 12th. Let's move this ahead to the 12th. So now we can see that the moon has moved into Virgo. The moon moves into Virgo just after midnight today on the 12th, on Wednesday the 12th at 12:55 a.m. The moon moves into Virgo. But now we can also see that the Venus and Mercury, it's still very close to conjunction. I mean, even at noon, the Venus-Mercury conjunction is less than a degree, but now but here on the 12th, it's now Mercury that's making the exact half square with Uranus. Yesterday, it was Venus. This is all going to be tied up into one kind of sweeping event, which is going to be how what we want, that's Venus, what we desire, and how we talk and what we say, that's Mercury, is basically creating a bit of conflict and a bit of upset. There is definitely a reaction here to what is being spoken and to what doesn't feel right. And I think this is continuing to build because we also have today on Wednesday, the 12th, we have the sun making its exact conjunction with Saturn. That's at 3:28 a.m. on the 12th. And it's almost like we've run into a wall. Authority, Saturn, the sun, vitality are basically saying this is the way it is. And it may not be comfortable, but at least the lines are being drawn in a way that we know what we're up against. Now, all of this is feeding to the fact that as the moon moved into Virgo early this morning, late last night or early this morning, depending on where you are on the planet, the moon is heading toward its opposition to the sun, the full moon, which is late tomorrow night. We'll go to that chart in just a moment. In fact, let's actually move ahead to a chart that's at noon on the 13th. And at noon on the 13th, we can see that the moon is already just 5.5 degrees away from being exactly opposite the sun. But note how close the sun is to the north node. The sun to the north node is less than 4 degrees away. And so we're coming into the full moon. And whenever there's a full moon or a new moon, when the sun or the moon are close to the nodal axis, that's when we have an eclipse. And so what we need to look at now is the exact eclipse. here we are looking at a chart for 11:54 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And what that means is that for many of us, the full moon eclipse, the full moon, will actually occur on March 14th, because any time zone that is east of Pacific time zones, meaning New York or central United States or even in Europe, this means that you'll have the eclipse in the early morning hours of Friday, March 14th. But once you've adjusted for your time zone, you can see now that the full moon eclipse, the full moon in Virgo, lunar eclipse, is at 23 degrees and 57 minutes of Virgo to 23 degrees 57 minutes of Pisces. And I think there's two things that are significant about this eclipse. First of all, the most important thing, I think, is that Uranus is at the point of Thales for this eclipse. Now, the point of Thales is a point that is trine one side of an opposition. Here we have Uranus trine the full moon, the eclipsing full moon. And Uranus at the point of Thales is sextiling the sun, and the tightness of this is significant, and the fact that these aspects are applying we're looking at a 6 minute of orb. 6 minutes is 1/10 of a degree, meaning that Uranus, the planet of sudden change, of electric change, the planet of releasing built up tension. What's the tension? The tension here is between the effective and efficiency of how we feel, the moon in Virgo, opposing the sun and Saturn, because remember, we have Sun-Saturn conjunction, so this full moon is not only in this aspect to Uranus, but the full moon is also opposing Saturn. And so we have this confrontation with reality, with authority, and yet this kind of Uranus sudden change, sudden release, the tension of a tug of war, the rope breaking, something happening here. I think that this is very, very significant. And I think it's important, just going back to what I said at the very beginning, that the planets aren't moving very fast, because there's so much change from direct to retrograde and retrograde to direct. And there's not a lot of aspects being made. But here we have an eclipse that shows that there's something happening that really releases a lot of stress, a lot of tension. And of course, we also have Mars in this equation that's moving closer and closer toward its square to Chiron, that feeling like something is in the way of getting what we want. Maybe even our old fears or feelings are in the way of getting what we need to get to. At the same time, Mars is getting closer and closer to its trine to Saturn, which is a suggestion that the organizational factor here will overcome whatever those resistances are. So this is a very interesting full moon eclipse. I'm sure a lot of other astrologers will have a lot to say about this eclipse, but I think that the fact that Uranus is at that release point, that point of Thales, is incredibly potent, is incredibly powerful. And I think the other thing that is also significant here is that the Mercury and Venus, even though they're separating, they're both coming off of that very tight half square to Uranus, which just suggests to me that there's a lot of sudden breakage or breakthrough in what the status quo might be, or what we think the status quo is or should be. That is March 13th. And of course, on the 14th, now we have the sun making the exact sextile with Uranus. It's very early in the morning, and for all practical purposes, it was playing through at the moment of the full moon eclipse just hours ago. The sun's exact sextile with Uranus is at 2:16 a.m. But here on the 14th, we have the other factor that's also important in yesterday's in yesterday's eclipse, and that's the fact that Mercury is now stationary retrograde, and Mercury at 9 degrees, exactly 9 degrees and 35 minutes, is turning retrograde, even though it's not moving very fast. Again, even if we go back, several days, Mercury reached 9 degrees of Aries on the 12th, and it's still at 9 degrees of Aries on the 17th. So, it is technically retrograde, but it's going to take a little bit time for that to build, and Mercury will remain retrograde for the rest of the month. Mercury turns direct on April 7th. And what this means is that for the rest of the month, it may feel even more like we're just spinning wheels with both Mercury and Venus retrograde. Mercury turns direct on April 7th, and Venus turns direct on April 12th. So in April, we'll begin to get some forward movement out of both of those planets. But until then, it may feel like we're taking a remedial course in what we didn't get right. Something slipped through the cracks, and we're now given an opportunity to kind of try to get it back on track, because things are definitely being pulled out of whack already. Here on the day after the eclipse, on March 14th, we can also see that the moon has moved into Libra. The moon moves into Libra at 11:58 a.m. So by noon, it's just at 0 degrees of Libra, just having entered Libra. But I think that when the moon moves into Libra, I think we begin to feel like we're getting clarity, and it really may be a push comes to shove period of time where we actually begin to express what it is that we need to express, especially if it's something that we should have said yesterday, last week, last month, last year. Now that both Mercury and Venus are retrograding, this is like a redo, reconsider, review, reassess. All these rewords, I think, come into our mind at this point in time. That is the 14th. We have a couple of days where there is no major aspects, although we can see that the moon moving through Libra will make a trine with Jupiter midday. Late morning, it'll oppose the planets in Aries, the Venus and Mercury. There may be some stress either in relationship or in this idea of how I want to do something that's nice, but it may not be coming across that way. That's the Aries to Libra polarity. That's the 15th. By the 16th, we can see that the moon moving through latter degrees of Libra is making a square to Mars and an opposition to Chiron, maybe stirring up some of that energy around the feelings that we have why we can't do what we need to or want to do. We also have Mercury now retrograding back into that half square with Uranus. It never really has gone away. I mean, going all the way back to March 11th, when we had that first Venus half square with Uranus, and then the 12th, the Mercury half square to Uranus. Now we're getting on the retrograde, the Mercury half square to Uranus again. And it's like words are being spoken that are stirring up more than we want to stir up. This is not an easy period of time. But again, regardless of what's being stirred up, I don't think that a lot of forward progress is being made. That's on the 16th. By the 17th, the moon moves into Scorpio. It does that at 12:30 a.m., early hours of the morning, Pacific time on Monday, the 17th. As it does that, it will begin to pick up on a square with Pluto. Again, our feelings are intense, but they're not comfortable. They're out of whack with kind of the deeper consideration of who's holding on to power. I don't think the Scorpio moon at least in early degrees, feels all that good. As the moon moves through Scorpio, it'll begin to pick up on trines to the planets in Pisces, and even a trine to Mars through Tuesday and Wednesday. But I think here on Monday, the feelings are not all that comfortable. We also have the sun making a conjunction with the nodal axis. Again, I think there's a bit of a time warping here, a feeling like stuff is happening on a very deep level. The sun is also moving toward its conjunction with Neptune. That's exact on the 19th. We'll get there in just a moment. But of course, as the sun moves toward its conjunction with Neptune on the 19th, both Neptune and the sun are inching towards their transition into Aries. And so again, we're getting this end. The things are ending, something new is beginning, but it's not quite yet there yet. And there's a lot of uncertainty around what it is that is unfolding. That's the 17th. On the 18th, we can see now midday that the moon is picking up on that trine to Mars that I mentioned. And it's also moving closer to its trines to the sun and Neptune. The sun is by noon on Tuesday. The sun is only 1 degree away from its conjunction to Neptune. As we go to Wednesday, the 19th, we can now see that the sun is conjoined Neptune at 29 degrees of Pisces. Meanwhile, midday, the moon at 29 degrees of Scorpio is harmonizing with the sun and Neptune. And this is really intriguing because everything changes by the 20th, or at least the sun and the moon. But right now we're getting kind of this flowing of this energy of the old stuff, not of the new stuff. But here, look at the Mars squaring Chiron. That's also been inching closer and closer together, because now Mars square Chiron is only 1.5 degrees from being exactly square. That will continue, over the days ahead. And as I mentioned earlier, that's exact on the 26th. So we'll see that move forward. Also here on the 19th, we have the moon moving into Sagittarius at 1:16 p.m., just an hour and a quarter after this chart at noon. So we have the rest of March 19th, Wednesday, the moon having moved into Sagittarius, perhaps uplifting our energy a bit, giving us some ideas of hope, some potential of what's to come. We move to the 20th, and we now see that the sun has moved into Aries. The actual ingress of the sun from Pisces into Aries occurs at 2:01 a.m., and that's Pacific time, Pacific Daylight Time. And that is the vernal equinox, the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere, the autumnal equinox in the southern hemisphere. But that defines this world point, the 0 degrees of Aries, the marking of something that's happening that's new. Over the days ahead, the sun will join up with in about 3-4 days with Venus. The sun will also join up with Mercury, as Venus and Mercury are retrograding back toward the sun. And of course, we have over the week ahead, we have the moon moving around, getting closer and closer. By the 29th, we'll have the moon all the way back in Aries, and that'll be the new moon eclipse. And we'll get there in a few minutes. So on the 20th, we kind of have the beginning of Aries. Aries, it's like a jolt of energy. It's like we're now moving into something new again, but we've already had Venus and Mercury there for a while, and they've almost overextended their position. They're retrograding. They're heading back toward Pisces, maybe for safety. I don't know. But there's something here about the energy moving both backwards and forwards. Pisces is the energy moving in both directions. It's the fish moving, in two ways, connected by the golden thread. The opposition of good and evil, up and down, male and female, red and blue, Democrat, Republican. I mean, any bifurcation that you can think of right now, I believe, is being accentuated. That's on the 20th. We have Venus retrograding here on the 20th also. And by the 21st, Venus is now making a sextile with Pluto on the retrograde. This is a repeat of an energy that Venus has already made. It's a reminder that when we go deeper, that there's a sense of more importance. Venus, when it was direct retrograded, Venus, when it was direct, sextiled Pluto back at the beginning of February. And now on March 21st, it is retrograde sextiling Pluto again. And by May 6th, it will make its third and final sextile direct. And these are all senses of what we want, our sense of what's important, our sense of what we value, our desires in life in general, the what we have. This is Venus sextiling Pluto is we want to go deeper. We're not satisfied with what we're getting on the surface, and this really does drive the energy deeper. Meanwhile, the sun is moving forward a degree a day while Venus retrograding backs into the sun, and its retrograde cazimi, meaning in the heart of the sun, occurs at 6:07 p.m. on Saturday, March 22nd. We also have the moon moving into Capricorn just after midnight at 12:28 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And so we have, there's a huge shift of energy here. And with the moon moves into Capricorn, we have a couple of days of serious stuff. We're feeling like the structure, the authority, the status quo is not working, and yet we don't have the wherewithal to move forward because Venus is still retrograding. Mercury is also retrograding back into its square as the moon moves forward. By midday, the moon is square Mercury. Earlier in the day, it's square the sun and Venus. March 22nd, a bit of discomfort. By the 23rd, the sun will move into the same position where Venus was a day ago, and the sun makes its sextile with Pluto. So again, these are not casual energies. There's power plays going on here, and stuff is really happening. In fact, Mercury retrograding back toward the sun makes its cazimi with the sun, meaning that it joins up with the sun in its retrograde on Monday, March 24th. And on the 24th, early in the morning, actually at 8:24 a.m., the moon moves into Aquarius. As the moon moves into Aquarius, it joins up with Pluto. Again, another layer of intensity. But now the moon and Pluto are both sextiling these planets in early Aries, kind of giving us some way to move, taking the opportunity of what we can do to move ahead, even though Venus and Mercury are retrograding, and they're both heading back not only toward Pisces, but towards their conjunctions with Neptune, which on one hand can be visionary and spiritual, and on the other hand can be as confusing as hell, or heaven, both. That's on the 24th. On the 25th, Mercury retrograding backs into its sextile with Pluto. Again, all these planets moving through early Aries, the Sun, Mercury, and Venus, whether the direct motion or the retrograde motion, there's powerful stuff going on, and there's opportunity to get to the bottom of things or for things to come out in the open, all of which are important. Also on Tuesday, the 25th, the moon makes a trine with Jupiter midday. And again, there's opportunity, there's expansion, there's the sense of hope for what's ahead in the future. At the same time, we can see that Mars is pushing to that square to Chiron. Remember that Mars is exact square Chiron tomorrow on the 26th. But even here on the 25th, we can see that it is 21 degrees to 21 degrees. It's just Mars square Chiron. is just a quarter of a degree from being exact. And so we're already feeling all those reasons and all that why we can't accomplish what we want to accomplish. And it can be a bit frustrating, even though we have hope and we have a sense of where we can go with all of this. And that's the exciting piece of this. Now, let's also look at this Venus retrograde, because Venus retrograding uh, on the 25th, midday is at 0 degrees of Aries. And when we go to the 26th, we can see that as Venus is retrograding backwards by noon here, it's still in Aries, and it actually retrogrades back into Pisces just after midnight tonight. We'll see that chart in just a moment, but it's at 1:40 a.m. On Thursday, the 27th. But here on the 26th, also, we have the moon moving into Pisces. We can see at noon the moon is at 29 degrees of Aquarius, and by just a little bit after noon, actually the exact time is 12:31 p.m. The moon moves from Aquarius into Pisces, and of course that's where the moon was at the beginning of the month. I mean, just for a few hours, because the moon moved into Aries on March 1st. But we've seen the moon go through an entire cycle. And if we move this ahead to the 27th, we can see now that the moon is by noon on the 27th, the moon is in mid Pisces. We can also now see that Venus has backed up into Pisces, and it did that at 1:40 a.m. on the 27th, as I think I already mentioned. But it also conjoins, perfects its conjunction with Neptune, totally confusing us and giving us a sense of romantic, visionary, beautiful, dreamy, or even illusory, depressive. I mean, there's this sense of vision occurs, that it's not connected with reality necessarily, and that Venus lines up with Neptune at 6:13 a.m. on the morning of March 27th. We can also see that over March 27th and into the 28th, that the moon will move from Pisces into Aries. Let's move this ahead to the 28th. And at noon, we can see that the moon is at 29 degrees of Pisces, conjoining Venus and Neptune. Again, the level of uncertainty, the level of dreaminess. It's hard to tell what's romantic and what's beautiful from what's, just kind of what's happening, the discouragement or the disillusion of having things not be what we think we want, or what we're seeing is not what we're necessarily getting. So this is March 28th at noon, and on the 29th, as the moon moves from Pisces into Aries, we have the Aries new moon. And this Aries new moon occurs at 9 degrees of Aries at 3:57 a.m., and that would be on the 29th. Remember, the moon just moved into Aries at midday yesterday on the 28th. And here in the early hours of the morning on Saturday, the 29th, and again, this is at 3:57 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, we can see that the moon and the sun are conjoined at 9 degrees of Aries. And I think this is a significant eclipse because how tight the half square is from the eclipse point to Uranus. Now, if you remember, the full moon eclipse had Uranus at the point of Thales, meaning that Uranus was sextile and trine the Virgo full moon and the Pisces sun. And now Uranus is making a half square to the sun and the moon. The half square between this solar eclipse and Uranus is about a half a degree. And that half square is very unsettling, it's anxiety producing, and it's motivational. We are motivated to do something, to make change. And there's change in the air because look, Neptune is at 29 degrees of Pisces, 58 minutes, meaning that it's a hair away from that 0 degree Aries point. At the same time, Mercury at 0 degrees of Aries and 29 minutes. That's zero. That's a half a degree of Aries retrograde. Mercury is at that same point going backward, heading back for its conjunction with Neptune. I mean, this is all like just moments away. In fact, the the new moon eclipse occurs just before 4 a.m. Mercury backs into Pisces the same day at 7 p.m., 7:17 p.m., and within a half an hour of that, Mercury joins up with Neptune at 7:46 p.m., and that's when the sun also is making a half square to Uranus. Remember, the moon and the sun are making that half square to Uranus that is within that's about a half a degree from being exact. And the sun perfects that by evening time on the 29th also. And then, of course, Mercury moves into Aries just a few hours later on the morning of the 30th. We'll get to that chart in just a moment. But the other thing here that is significant is that we've also now have the Mars squaring Chiron, which I've been talking about for 4 days, and I think that I slid right through it as we were talking about the exact moment, and that is on the 26th. Mars square Chiron is actually stirring up stuff that we've been feeling for quite a while. And when I say quite a while, I think I mentioned this at the very beginning of the forecast, but back on October 13th, just a couple of weeks before the presidential election in the United States, Mars squared Chiron. And then the end of January, beginning of February, this year, 2025, Mars retrograde squared Chiron. And now on the 26th, Mars squares Chiron for the third and final time, and it will be in play throughout the entire month and even right up through the very first of April and then some. And it's that feeling like things aren't right and we don't know how to fix them, or for every time we move forward, we're moving backward. And that's complicated by the fact that Venus and Mercury are retrograde. And I now want to come back to the eclipse chart just for a moment, because here on the 29th, we can see that Venus is back in Pisces, and Mercury is ready to change back into Pisces, and that half square to Uranus now is so activated, and we still have Mars making that square, that square to Chiron is just minutes of orb from being exact at the moment of the eclipse here on the 29th, even when we go here to the 30th. At noon on the 30th, we have the Mars square Chiron is separating, but it's still within a degree of being exact. On the 30th, we can also see that the moon comes to that. It exacerbates that same square aspect. And yet here on the 30th, we can see by noon that Neptune has moved into Aries for the first time in 165 years. Well, it moved into Aries 165 years ago. And it would be about 150 years ago when it left Aries. So it hasn't been in Aries for about 150 years. The other thing that we can see is that the moon, having moved through Aries by midday on March 30th, is at 29 degrees of Aries. And the amount of change here is hugely dynamic. With Mercury now having moved back into Pisces, it's like we're getting a replay on stuff. It's like things are new, but they're not new. It's confusing. Are we moving ahead? Are we moving backward? And then the moon actually enters Taurus on the 30th, just afternoon at 1:15 p.m. On the 31st, we have no exact aspects, but we can see that Neptune is now a few more minutes into Aries. We can see that Mars is moving closer and closer to its trine um, to Saturn. The Mars trine Saturn is exact on April 4th. I'll have more to say that on the April forecast. But the fact is that we have tools that we need to organize. And even though Mercury and Venus are still moving retrograde, by the time we get to April, by the time we get to the end of April, we will be through this little log jam and things will be moving in a new direction again, just as we thought things were going one way. I think we're going to see things moving slightly differently. We'll see how that plays out. But of course, the end of the month with the moon in Taurus, there is a feeling of a bit more stability. We also have Saturn coming into an exact sextile with Uranus by the end of the month, by March 31st. That Saturn-Uranus sextile is less than 1/4 of a degree from being exact. And I think in some ways, this is beginning to show us the potential for finding balance between holding on to some of the old and moving into some of the new. Things that have been very disruptive, we may find ways to find stability within the disruption in order to regain some stability on the far end of all of this. It's a crazy month, no question about it. And it's a curious month again because it feels like there's just a trade-off, like one planet's moving direct, another one's retrograde, then one's moving retrograde, the other's direct. I think I saw something by Sam Reynolds, which I thought was very it was a very good image, and it called up the old kids game of Chutes and Ladders, where just things are shifting and you go one place and all of a sudden you're someplace else. I think I said that February was the Hall of Mirrors in my forecast for February. And I think the Hall of Mirrors in March becomes a hall of mirrors becoming real, but we still can't quite tell which way things are going, whether we're going back to the future or into the past, however that plays out. It's full of paradox, and we'll have to see what happens as the month unfolds. So that's it. Thanks to all of you who support this work through Patreon. If you don't, go to patreon.com/Rick Levine. Make sure you're on my mailing list. Hit subscribe on this. On the YouTube channel, feel free to share this. And with that, I will end by saying, as I always do, think cosmically, act locally, because it does no good at all to think cosmically unless we act locally. Be kind, be compassionate, and I'll see you later on in the month.